Andy Rouse is a pretty highly regarded wildlife photographer. I've actually been following him for a couple of years. On social media, I mean, obviously, not out in public. He's also a Canon ambassador. And in the last couple of days, he's been putting up some rather intriguing posts on his social media, particularly Instagram. And I mean intriguing posts because he's touting about some new, rather extreme sounding gear that everyone's trying to fathom exactly what it is. Now, this isn't just one particular post that sparked everybody's interest. There's actually been several rather cryptic posts over the last couple of days. So Andy's Instagram format is obviously a picture. Generally, it's a picture of a tiger. And then in the caption is usually a bit of a backstory about either the area that he is shooting in and the history of it, or a history of that particular animal. But he usually mentions at the bottom the general EXIF information as well. So camera body, camera lens, and the settings that he shot with as well. Now, his usual camera gear is something like a 1DX Mark II or a 5D Mark IV, or more recently the EOS R, and then normally one of the big white telephoto lenses. However, the recent posts, or some of the recent posts, haven't done that at all. One of them mentioned that he was testing out some new gear. Another one then mentioned that he wasn't going to talk about what the new gear was. Then there was two posts that really caught my eye. One of them caught everybody's eye, which was that whatever the camera was that he was shooting with, he had to reduce the motor drive speed from 30 frames a second down to 5 frames a second, simply because he was getting too many shots in focus, too many images to deal with. So straight away, we're talking about a camera body that is capable of shooting at 30 frames a second. I suppose technically most cameras can shoot at 30 frames a second if you put them in video mode. But let's assume for now that we're talking about a still camera capable of 30 frames a second. The other post that I've seen that caught my eye that I've not seen anybody else bring up was this particular image. And the reason why it caught my eye is because the lens he stated it was shot with is an 80 to 150mm f2.8. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of a single 80 to 150mm f2.8 in any format, let alone in a full frame format. Not even micro four thirds or medium for anything. I don't know of a lens with that exact focal range. Now, obviously, it's possible that it's a typo, but then what would the typo be? I don't know. The only lens that would come close to it in a full frame format would be 70 to 200, but that's a hell of a typo. Now, the whole Canon rumour mill's gone absolutely batshit about, is this, a new Canon DSLR or a new Canon camera, and what's it going to be? Andy is arguably one of Canon's biggest ambassadors. He was one of the first people to get his hands on the 1DX Mark II when that was released. Canon rumours noted back in February that apparently their ambassadors were out and about using a replacement for the 1DX Mark II, presumably a 1DX Mark III. So it would be logical to presume that this new camera we're talking about is a replacement for the 1DX Mark II. However, Andy has been quoted in one of his comments as saying it's not Canon gear. So if it's not Canon gear, what the hell is it? Judging by the peculiar focal length lens, initially I thought perhaps it's a micro four thirds setup. 80 to 150 would give you an equivalent of 160 to 300 mil. That seems a likely combination for a wildlife photographer. However, it's then a question of what camera is it? I mean, in terms of micro four thirds, it could be Olympus, but they've only just released the M1X at the start of this year. That could only do 16 frames a second with full AF tracking. Doesn't seem likely that Olympus are bringing out yet another camera so soon after the M1X. Could be Panasonic, I suppose, but then it seems like an unusual turn for Panasonic to go down that route, but who knows? The other possibility is that it's not micro four thirds at all. I wonder, could this be the Sony A7000, the Mini A9 that's been rumoured? Could that be about to unveil itself? And now you might be thinking, hang on, Andy Rouse is a Canon ambassador, why the hell would he be shooting Sony? Well, firstly, just because he's a Canon ambassador doesn't mean he's not going to, potentially use other gear. Lots of big photographers do that. I think it was Scott Kelby years ago. I remember an interview where he was saying that I think he was shooting with, I can't remember if he was shooting Nikon and switched to Canon, or he was shooting Canon and switched to Nikon, but basically one of the big manufacturers just sent him a load of gear to try out. He tested it and then ended up switching. So camera manufacturers will want those big name photographers using their gear because it helps grow their brand. And when I was at the photography show this year, I actually ran into Borryd Lucas, who is another big name wildlife photographer. And I've always considered him as a Canon shooter. I've always seen him shooting Canon until I saw him signing his book on the Sony stand. And then when I chatted to him, it actually turns out that he's still shooting with Canon as well, but he's also been recently trying out Sony gear as well. Which makes me wonder, in Sony's strive for becoming world leaders in the camera market, are they reaching out to Andy and have they sent him a new camera to try out? And then if so, what is it? It's been rumoured for a while now that Sony are working on a flagship aps-c camera, an A7000, essentially an A9 with an aps-c sensor. It's also been heavily rumoured that will be capable of shooting up to 30 frames a second, which coincides with what Andy's post said in the first place. I think there's a few things that are fairly safe to go on here. The first is that Andy's using a camera. That's a hell of a statement, isn't it? Eh? A professional photographer using a camera? What? He's using a camera. He won't mention what the camera is, which suggests that it's possibly a new camera. It's capable of shooting 30 frames a second still images. The fact that Sony as well have recently released the animal IAF tracking all kind of rolls in with everything else that it would suit wildlife photographers. So I'm wondering if this is the first hints of a Sony A7000. But what do you guys think? Do you think this is a Sony A7000? Do you think it's a different camera? And if so, what? And what do you make of that bloody 80 to 150mm lens as well? What is that all about? On Sony APS-C, that would be an equivalent of 120 to 225mm, which is just an even weirder focal range. Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.